Hey, last one. 3, 2, chapter 6, all you. Are we supposed to be meditating or something?
It's not finished loading.
Okay, just checking. You guys, keep letting Beltnick run it. She's never been potty trained. Everything she touches, she breaks.
They keep learning the first time. If you keep asking to do it, like, why? No, please.
I saw it. There it is. Boom.
Okay, so we did chapter 6 on interpersonal communication and conversation. And a conversation is made up of these 5 things. First is the opening. That's just the greeting where you say hello or hey or how are you. And feed forward is when the person that you're talking to is starting to get the feel of what the conversation is going to be about. So if the greeting was hey and then you said, did you watch the game last night? Then they would know that the conversation you're talking about is going to be centered around sports. And business is when you go more in depth into the focus of the conversation. So if he answers, when you said, how was the game? And you answered, it was good, did you watch this part? And you start talking about the different events that happened during that game. And feedback, that's when you kind of back away from the conversation. You just show that I'm ready to be done, just wrapping it up. And the closing, obviously, is when you say goodbye. And that is when the person shows whether they want to have a conversation with you again or not. So if I'm talking to someone in the hallway and I'm ready to stop talking to them, I'll just say, okay, bye, and I'll just walk away. But if I actually enjoy talking to them, then I'll say, all right, I have to go, but I'll talk to you later. And these are the principles of conversation. The principle of turn taking. The conversational turns are just when you're switching back and forth between speaker and listener. So it's just a typical conversation that you would have in the day. And meta communication is communicating about communication. So you're talking about a discussion that you could have had in the past. And speaker cues. First one is turn maintaining cues. That's when, an example you could say, someone you're talking to says, oh, I just got these new shoes. You're maintaining the conversation by jumping in and saying, I have the same ones, and you're telling a story about how you got them or where you got them, who got them for you. And turn yielding cues are the pauses in between when you're done talking. So you're just showing them that you can start talking, I'm finished. And turn requesting cues, that's when you are trying to speak. So if everyone's talking, I just say, hey guys, I have to tell you something, and I'm requesting you to be the speaker. And turn denying cues is when someone could be talking and say, hey, can I talk to you for a second? And I'll say, no, I'm busy, I don't really want to talk right now, I can't. So you're just denying that. And back-channeling cues and interruptions is, just when someone butts into your conversation when you're trying to talk, or they're talking over you.
Okay, the principle of dialogue is two-way interactions when two people are talking. You're both the speaker and the listener, so you're both listening to what the person has to say and talking back to them. And the object of dialogue is a mutual understanding and empathy. And then monologue is one person speaks and the other listens, so it's like the opposite. There's no real interaction between both people talking, so you may just be listening, you may just be talking. It's forced only in his or her own roles and has no real connection. And then the principle of immediacy is the creation of closeness, a sense of togetherness of one's between speaker and listener. So it's like when you're conveying a sense of interest and attention. It's like making someone like you. So you want to try and bring up, instead of when you're talking to them, instead of focusing on what you don't agree on. You focus on what you do agree on and emphasize on that. And then small talk. The topics and context of small talk is like you don't want to have you want to talk about things that are non-controversial. So you don't want to like disagree with them. You want to try to find something that more than likely you're going to agree on no matter what it is. It wants to be relatively short, brief interaction. So small talk you want to use in like the hallway or in the elevator or like standing in line to buy something. And guidelines for effective small talk is you want to be positive, sensitive, like stress the similarities again. And when introducing people, it is your job to introduce. So like if you're standing with your friend and then your cousin, and they don't know each other, it's your job to introduce them. And again, if those people you know have something in common, you can mention that to make the talk for them less tension. Now, because this is a handshake.
Okay. So excuses and apologies are two things that pretty much everybody uses. And an excuse is just saying like why you messed up. Like that I was late because I got stuck in traffic. That's an excuse. So there's good excuses and bad excuses. And the main difference is how often you use them. So if you don't use excuses very often, the more likely person that you're talking to is going to believe you. But if you, on the other hand, if you use them all the time, you're just going to be like, oh, they messed up again. And when using excuses, make sure you understand the problem, make sure you understand why the other person is upset with you. And acknowledge responsibility. Don't try to push it off onto somebody else. And then, on the other hand, if you can demonstrate that you had no control of the situation, then they're not going to be as upset with you. And then acknowledge, like, the other person's displeasure. Understand why they're upset with you, and don't try to push it off on them like, oh, you shouldn't be upset. Especially if they have a right to be. And make sure you assure that it will never happen again. And then apologies is just showing regret for something that you did. And then it also shows admission of wrongdoing, so you're admitting that you did something wrong. And then it also requests forgiveness, so you're asking them to forgive you for what you did. And then do's of an apology is mean it. You always, like, my mom always told me whenever I would do something wrong, she was like, apologize, so I'd say I'm sorry, and like just mumble it, and then she was always saying, like, you mean it. And specify what you're sorry for, saying, I'm sorry, instead of saying, I'm sorry for what I did, specify what you did. And express your understanding and regret, express that you're, understand why they're upset with you, and then you're sorry, and then assure that it won't happen again. And then don't apologize when it isn't necessary. Like in our culture, we use I'm sorry for a lot of things. We use it to express sorrow, and even though it's not really your fault. And justify your wrongdoing, so that's when the excuse comes in. And so just don't try and justify what you did. If you did something wrong, just admit it. And don't blame somebody else. Again, don't push it off on somebody else. Take responsibility. And don't include excuses when apologizing. So don't use the word but. So it's like, I'm sorry, but that's just, they're not going to believe you. They're not going to believe your apology. And then do it in person over the phone. Don't send an email or a text to say I'm sorry, because that's just really impersonal, and it's so easy just to type it than it is to say it to somebody's face. And complimenting is a message of praise, flattery, or congrats. So be real and honest. Don't fake it. If you don't mean a compliment, don't say it. And then don't over compliment. Because if you compliment somebody every day over everything, then they're not going to really believe you. It's not going to feel as special when you compliment somebody because it's going to be so overdone. And don't add a but, because that's going to sound like criticism. It's like, oh, I like your shoes, but that's just, it's not a good thing.
I like your shoes, but you have huge feet.
Yeah. And be specific. So instead of saying, oh, I like your story, say what you like about it, because then it feels more special. And when receiving a compliment, don't deny it or minimize the compliment, just accept it. Just say thank you. And if you do deny it, then that makes you seem like you have really low self-esteem and you don't really believe that you can do something good. So accept the compliment and say thank you, or even explain why you appreciate it, because that's going to make the person giving you the compliment feel good about themselves. Okay, and advice. When giving advice, listen to the person's thoughts and feelings and try to feel what they are feeling. So if you listen to them, you're not going to give advice on something that they're not even going to want. If you listen to what they actually want, then your advice is going to probably be better. And use evidence with your advice. So if you explain why you think that would work, or why something like a time that's happened in the past, more likely they're going to want to use your advice. And offer options of pros and cons. So if you offer 2 options and then give the pros and cons of each, then they have a more well-rounded choice. And then seek feedback. And so after you give advice, say, so do you think that would work? And then they can tell you if your advice was good or not. And say could instead of should. So instead of saying you should do this, that seems like you're pushing. And you can say, so you could do that. And then that's a suggestion. And then responding to advice, accept and consider it even if you're not going to follow along with it. And then don't retaliate or criticize their advice. They're trying to help you, and it takes a lot of courage to offer advice to somebody. So just accept it. And interact with the advice. If you have a conversation with them over it, then the more you're going to be able to get out of it. And then express your appreciation. Again, it takes a lot of courage, so just say thank you, either whether you want to go along with it or not.
Cool!